version. Let me show you where it is. So you remember the let's see, I probably showed you an article. So today there was a full markup of the THUD committee's appropriation bill, which they're the ones that tell you how much you're spending and where you're spending for discretionary spending like HUD, right? Now, this is the subcommittee markup on July 16th. Now, all I had to do was simply upload, and this is how I believe you should be using ChatGPT, especially when you have legalese 200-page bills and you're trying to figure out, okay, what was in the markup? So I just took that bill, I put it in the markup, and I asked ChatGPT, hey, what changes, if any, do you notice from this latest full markup summary by the TIA committee? So there's a few notable changes and confirmations. So this is going to be good, right? Compared to the earlier subcommittee draft. We talked about the subcommittee draft just a couple days ago, and just remember, right? The appropriation the appropriation process typically requires like 60 votes. The reconciliation process typically just says, hey, this is the cap spending. But in the reconciliation process, which is how you got to pass with just the narrow majority of Republicans in Washington, that's how you get the bill passed, but it usually only affects how you spend on mandatory items like Medicare, on Social Security, on taxes. And it could provide a cap, but it cannot tell you exactly how much you cannot cut discretionary spend like spending for HUD with the reconciliation process. So the cap might have been determined, but now it gets pushed down to the committees, and these 12 committees are going to roll up what the budget overall looks like for all the different agencies, all the different priorities. So when I took this latest markup bill, right? So they probably went through a few versions. This is the good part. This is the positive part. Was it essentially when I compared this latest markup versus what was previously disclosed or written here, right? This is the key takeaways right here from subcommittee markup. The Section 8 voucher is still funded, but this confirms that their position is still to keep everything flat. So that will probably mean you won't get any rent growth. And I already put in all these prompts so it knew exactly how to help me point out the implications that we as affordable housing investors should be mindful about. And again, this is not investment advice, there's no guarantees. Every state, every county, every public housing authority, they're gonna have their own different fundings. They might fill in a gap somewhere, right? That's not necessarily the case. But just FYI, for me personally, I would always underwrite with zero rent growth for at least the foreseeable next 3 years, for to say the least. Now, project-based rental assistance, they increased slightly. 237 million is not much from amongst the grand scheme of things of 17 billion. So your existing contracts are covered, so that's good, especially for any properties that have leveraged subsidies such as low income housing tax credits, because otherwise there would have been a serious risk of default on a lot of properties. Don't want to do that. So home funds are still have been eliminated. There's nothing changing there. Slightly adjusted. Let's see. The homeless assistance grants went up by 107 million. Okay. Housing for elderly, 950 million. That's pretty low. I feel like this would continue to increase here. Housing for persons with disabilities, great. Interesting. This says right here that the HUD salaries and staffing are going to be cut by 26%. I mean, that could affect even your housing authorities, but this is what it means, right? If you have a RAD conversion in place, if you have project-based vouchers or FHA applications, I mean, that could result in delays. So I would underwrite with more interest reserves and holding costs. CDBG, I thought they were going to go away from this. Okay, so they're going to keep 3.3 billion in CDBG grants, and we covered some of these topics about CDBG grants in our podcast episode. And just in case you don't know who we are, if you ever look up what is the best podcast on affordable housing investments, you're going to get our podcast. Oh, interesting. Well, you in both of these scenarios, you're going to see this. Oh, interesting. like these ones. All right, let's go back to our funding summary. Elimination of U.S. Interagency Council of Homelessness. Huh, okay, we'll be going away with that one. Community project funding, that's great. Okay. Oh, interesting. See, I even prompted it to say, hey, tell me what the impact is for each of your categories. If you're Section A investor, your renewals are fully funded, but your housing authority might hold your rents flat throughout next year at the minimum. Great. Home fund might are confirmed, so that has some gap risk, especially for your 9% tax credits, because home funds are typically last dollar in. Ground up prod developers, your CDBG grant projects are funded, so that's good news. Interesting. All right, so that's your latest update on some of the markups here. If I hear anything else, I'll let you know, especially as there might be implications for affordable housing. And this is a big difference than what was in the White House bill, because the White House bill gave guidance on what they want to spend on. But essentially, the Appropriations Committee has sort of ignored that guidance because, well, for the most part, I imagine that housing is pretty much a bipartisan issue. So I can see that why the funding for housing has been preserved, especially for HUD. So that's going to be good to know for you to keep track on. If I see any more updates, right, it's not completely in the safe zone because there is a possibility that the Senate could issue more cuts once it kind of goes back and forth between both sides. Now, hopefully, that's not the case because you need 60 votes to do so, and cutting housing is typically not something that most Democrats, given that it's a Republican majority, will go for. Again, not siding with any sides. I'm simply presenting you with what's happening and what has happened so that you can best prepare, especially if you are a Section A investor or a LIHTC developer or a ground developer, doesn't matter what it is, but this is how it all affects you. All right. I hope you all have an amazing Friday. I'll see you all tomorrow for Dave 6:59. Have a good one, everybody.